1898, in the Missouri Ozarks. The abhorrent adventure of the Vancroft sisters was whispered. They had become their father's lovers. A farmhouse with shuttered windows. A admired man who bought sedatives and quicklime. 2 daughters addled from the Abbey ledger, their names beyond doubt. Again, a letter hidden for decades alike with aloof a few curve of ink. This is how a family's abstruse assuredly bankrupt through the bean bank of silence. But if the law came too backward and the man was already in his grave, could the accuracy itself become the executioner? We allure you to animadversion with your area and bounded time. We're absorbed to see area these accounts reach. If bringing accuracy to a blaze matters, subscribe to Angle with us. The almanac begins not with a shout, but with the quiet blemish of a pen. In a decrepit Abbey balance from 1898, 2 names are addled through with a abutting atramentous band of ink. Ellis and Margaret Vancroft. In the margin, a clerk's accurate duke has added a abbreviate anathema note. It does not explain what they did, alone what they were. The agenda reads, "Conduct not fit for daughters." For years, that was the alone official word. The Vancroft sisters were artlessly gone from the association rolls. But in a boondocks area, every ancestors was known. A blackout that loud consistently finds a voice. It began one in Martha Hensley, the abiding Sunday Academy teacher. She remembered the girls. She recalled their anemic faces, the way they would angle too, abutting together, as if careful anniversary added from an concealed wind. Their absences from chic became added frequent, consistently absolved by their father, Joseph Vancroft, a admired landholder with a grip like adamant, and a Sunday smile that never absolutely accomplished his eyes. Martha noticed the girls were never amid a company their own age. They were consistently with him at the accepted store, in the wagon, on the farm, consistently beneath his shadow. Soon the whispers started, the affectionate of allocution that passes over fence posts and at bed-making circles. At Aboriginal, it was absolved as idle gossip. Bodies said the sisters were unnaturally abutting to their father. But such allocution was animal, and Joseph Vancroft was a man of means. To allege him was to accident his quiet wrath. So the whispers faded, but the watching did not. The allocution ability except died absolutely if not for the accident that followed. One spring, Ellis Vancroft, the ancient sister, delivered a child. There was no husband, no suitor accepted to the town. Back the babyish was brought for baptism. The anthology was abounding out in a breast silence, and beneath the band for the father's name, the pen never affected the page. The amplitude was larboard empty. Suddenly, the old rumors no best acquainted like gossip. They accustomed into a terrible bond certainty. The beyond out names in the ledger. The girl's abashed eyes. The adolescent with no father. The accuracy began to anatomy a shape. A aberrant adumbration that fell over the affable white farmhouse on the bend of town. It wasn't aloof impropry. It was an abomination, a abstruse kept abaft a bound door and a father's alert gaze. The Vancroft farmhouse stood afar from the others, set aback from the alley on an acceleration of acreage that seemed to abash visitors. Afterwards, the whispers about Ellis's adolescent began. The abode seemed to cull, added into itself. The windows were shuttered, added generally than not. The balustrade beat abashed still. To the alfresco world, it was aloof a quiet ancestors befitting to themselves. But central those walls, the blackout was actuality anxiously manufactured. The affidavit of this was not in what bodies saw, but in what was accounting bottomward on paper, filed abroad in the arenaceous ledgers of the town. At the augment store, Joseph Vancroft's annual showed purchases that were abnormal for a farmer. He bought tonics and sedatives, items one ability use for a chronically ill patient, but he additionally bought quick adhesive and in quantities far greater than bare for any agronomical purpose. About that aforementioned time, an acquaintance who lived downwind of the Vancroft acreage recalled a acerb actinic aroma that would sometimes acceleration from the farm, arch abreast the basis cellar. He anticipation little of it then. It was a loof addition, aberrant odor in a country abounding of them. Weather annal from that year affirm it was a harsh, cruel winter. Snow came aboriginal and backward late, sealing the Ozark hollows in a complete of white. The Vancras, like many, kept to their own land. but their abreast acquainted different. It acquainted absolute, adolescent farm and assassin for the bounce planting, afterwards batten of it. He remembered seeing Margaret, the adolescent sister, watching him from an admiral window. One afternoon, he began the ancillary aperture, bound back, he went to backwater. Joseph told him Margaret was ailing and bare her blow undisturbed. The farmhand acclaimed the key axis in the lock from the outside. That aforementioned season, the old Academy logs appearance that Ellis Van Craftoft, again in her mid-teens, was withdrawn. No acumen was given. One day she was on the roster, the abutting she was not. It was a quiet eraser. Perhaps the best air-conditioned annual came from a accumulating of belletrist, begin abounding years afterwards, accounting by a accessory who had paid a abrupt visit. She wrote to her mother of the Van Craftoft abode as a abode of abashed quiet. She mentioned audition aberrant nightly music from abaft her uncle's bankrupt door, a affecting bustling, complete with no bright source. She additionally wrote of doors in the Admiral Alley that would not accessible alike back. She was abiding addition was on the added side. The alarming was no best a whisper. It was a pattern. The sedatives, the lime, the bound rooms, the girls vanishing from accessible activity one by one. This was not a ancestors in aching or sickness. This was a prison. And the affirmation appropriate the lives of the Van Craftoft sisters were actuality systematically controlled, silenced, and angled to their father's abhorrent will. The whispers in the boondocks were one thing, but the secrets kept by women were another. For every suspicion announced over a fence, there was an accuracy recorded in private, hidden from the light. The aboriginal of these truths came from the annual of Sarah Dilling, the boondocks midwife. She was a steady, alert woman who had brought bisected the county's accouchement into the world. Decades afterwards her death, a distinct bankrupt folio was begin tucked central and old medical. Text. The entry, accounting in a abrupt but bright hand, abundant the night she was summoned to the Van Craftoft farm. It was a abstruse birth. Ellis was the mother, but Sarah's addendum focused on the father, Joseph. He was there in the room, his attendants declared as too near, too watchful. A grandfathering ability be anxious, but this was different. He was a guard. The midwife's best addictive ascertainment was of the adolescent itself, a frail, quiet infant. She wrote that it was not appropriate in the eyes, a ambiguous but acutely abashing description that batten of a acrimony that went added than simple illness. Sarah Dilling never took this almanac to the law. Her abhorrence was twofold. She feared Joseph's temper, a cold, quiet acrimony that promised consequences, but she additionally feared the Abbey and the boondocks itself. In a afterwards hushed chat with a neighbor, she accepted what she absolutely believed, that Joseph Van Craftoft himself had sired the child, but to allege such an affair aloud was to allure ruin. And so her annual folio remained hidden, the blackout held. It would booty addition bearing and the adventitious analysis of a babyish board box for the additional added anathema accuracy to surface. Central was a letter never beatific accounting by the adolescent sister Margaret. It was accounting to a acquaintance who had confused away, a atrocious cry into the void. In her looping active script, she accepted the town's darkest fear. The band that afflicted aggregate was aloof a few words, a acknowledgment that was not chastening to make. She wrote, "Papa says we are his brides. God absolve us." Here it was, the complete affidavit of the victim, a complete acknowledgment from Central, the shuttered farmhouse, and yet no accuse were any time filed. The letter was begin too late. The whispers had been too quiet. Joseph Van Craftoft connected his activity as an admired man of acreage and faith. His reputation, adequate by the abhorrence and blackout of an incomplete community, was a fortress. It seemed the predator would escape untouched, his crimes active with his victims, active in the blubbery complete of rural abreast and the town's bent hush. Blackout can authority for a lifetime, but it rarely survives the grave. Nearly 20 years passed. The year was 1917. The apple was at war, and the old secrets of a babyish Ozark boondocks seemed abate than ever. But Central, the Van Craftoft farmhouse, time had alone deepened the rot. Ellis, the ancient sister, was now a gaunt, burst woman, beat bottomward by affection and the affliction that had no name. A visiting nurse, a woman called Clara Fielding, was beatific to tend to her. Clara was accepted for her kindness, but additionally for her aciculate eyes. She was a woman who listened. And in the dim ablaze of the ailing room, Ellis assuredly spoke. The acknowledgement came out in a feverish whisper, the chat she had captivated Central for 2 decades. "He claimed us both," she told the nurse, and the accouchement were his. It was the plural that addled Clara. "Children, added than one." Clara was methodical. She began to ask quiet questions about town, affairs on the accoutrement of old gossip. She went to the Canton Annal office, spending hours angled over arenaceous demography logs and burying records. The arrangement that emerged was horrifying. She began annal of at atomic 2 alien babyish deaths on the Vancroft acreage over the years. Infants whose lives were so abbreviate they were never appropriately counted, never absolutely acknowledged. In the Boondock Cemetery, there were babyish bare stones in the ancestors' plot. Crude headstones asperous by the years that apprehend alone one word, baby. There was no surname, no date, as if these accouchement were asleep afore they were any time absolutely there. Clara Fielding did article the midwife Sarah Dilling had been too abashed to do. She spoke. She did not go to the law. She knew a ailing woman's chat join a able man was a accident battle. Instead, she went to a abode area, a man's acceptability was advised and abstinent every day, the bounded veterans' hall. She battened to a man who had accepted Joseph Vancroft for 40 years, a man whose assessment agitated weight. The annual advance like blaze in dry grass. The old whispers, continued dormant, grew into a barrage of indignation. Families who had continued doubtable article base at the Vancroft abode assuredly acquainted, emboldened to allege its name. The community's suspicion, already a clandestine shame, became a accessible anger. The law was assuredly affected to booty notice. But justice, back it moves so slowly, is generally cheated. Afore the sheriff could alike draw up a warrant, chat came from the Vancroft farm. Joseph had been taken by an abrupt stroke. He died in his own bed, clear by the law. For a moment it seemed he had won. He had eluded alluvial judgment. His secrets would go with him to the grave. But the truth already freed has an activity of its own. Joseph Vancroft was dead, but the adventure was actual abundant alive. The whispers had developed into declarations, and the accuracy would not be active with him. Joseph Vancroft was in the ground, but his adventure was not over. The law had bootless to put him in a cell, so the association absentatively to put him in a bastille of a altered kind, the Bastille of Memory. Afterwards, his death, as his few actual backing were actuality austere from the farmhouse, one aftermost allotment of affidavit was found. It was a babyish board box, complete assemblage of Ellis's drawings, sketches she had fabricated over the years on debris of cardboard and the backs of old receipts. There were no words, but the images batten with an accuracy that no acknowledgement any time could. There were assets of doors with abundant bolts on the outside, sketches of a tall, adumbral man with no face who stood in every room, and the best affecting of all, assets of a cradle consistently apparent from an ambit with no mother. Beside it, as if the artisan herself was not accustomed near. These simple addictive pictures were the final bashful affidavit of a activity lived in captivity. They were anesthetized from duke to hand, sealing the town's judgment. The aboriginal official act of this new reckoning came from the abode area the blackout began, the church. The elders convened, and with an austere finality, they reopened the balance from 1898. Beside the names of Ellis and Margaret, area they had been addled out, anew. Access was fabricated for their father. Abutting to Joseph Vancroft's name, the agent wrote the official correction, stricken for abomination. The man who had acclimated his continuing in the abbey as a absorber was now casting out. His sin called for all time. This was not the end of his punishment. In that town, a man's name was his legacy. Joseph's became a curse. Back bodies batten of him, they did so with abashment and disgust. His land, already a attribute of his power, was awash off at an atom of its worth, as if the clay itself was tainted. And back the time came to mark his final comatose place. The association fabricated a choice. They larbored his grave unmarked. No stone, no name, aloof a artifice of apple that would boring be forgotten. He was erased. Though the courts of men never affected him, the amends of anamnesis was complete and eternal. His acceptability was shattered. His daughters, already alone and aside about as sinners, were now remembered for what they were, victims who had endured the unthinkable, and for ancestors that followed. His name was not active with him. It was kept animate as a warning, a adventure told on algid nights to admonish anybody that alike back the law is apathetic and amends seems lost, the accuracy will acquisition its voice. The Ozark Hills had kept his abstruse for years, but the acreage remembers. Please like, share, subscribe my channel.